Good afternoon, BUSD family, and welcome to our BUSD Budget Business Town Hall. I'm Unikia Ford-Morthel, the proud superintendent of Berkeley Unified School District, and we are excited to have so many of you all joining us in this space this afternoon. Before going any further with our presentation for the afternoon, I am going to pause and ask if there's anyone who is on this webinar who needs translation services in Spanish, please raise a hand. Again, if you are in need of translation services in Spanish, we're asking that you please raise your hand. And then I'm going to pause and introduce Ms. Isabel Parra, who will give directions to how you can access the Spanish translation of this webinar. Isabel?
Buenas tardes. Si alguien necesita traducción en español, por favor, levante la mano en el dibujito que está en la parte de abajo de su pantalla para que sean transferidos al cuarto donde vamos a estar interpretando. Gracias.
Thank you,
Ready.
Isabel. And
Thank
again, if
you.
anyone is in need of services, please raise your hand. Isabel?
Thank you. Yes. So we're just waiting and then they will be transferred to my room.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you all. And so again, coming on behalf of myself and our amazing Board of Education, who you see here, I'm bringing greetings on behalf of our President, Khadijah Brown, our Vice President, Mike Chang, and Directors Koren, Shanaski, and Vasudeo. I also want to share with you all that sharing this space with us this afternoon are 4 members of our BUSD team who will be presenting with me and sharing some information in response to questions that we've received. We have Pauline Phalansby, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, Emily Mayer, who's our Executive Director of Business Services, Jill Hogendijk, our Associate Superintendent of Ed Services, and Samantha Tobias Espinosa, our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources. We always start any BUSD convening by grounding ourselves in our shared mission, and that mission is here on the screen. It is to enable and inspire our diverse student body to achieve academic excellence and make positive contributions to the world. We know that how we allocate our resources, be it resources of time, be it our fiscal resources, or be it our resources of people, is really important to our ability to actually realize this mission statement. And we appreciate the interest and the participation that we've had from a number of folks across the BUSD community and family in making sure that our resource allocation truly does allow us and facilitate our advancements to the end of our mission towards academic achievement and positive contributions. We appreciate the number of folks, about 600 of you responded to our survey, asking questions and sharing with us what you want to know more about. And we've used that information to inform this afternoon's agenda. This afternoon, we'll focus on 5 key areas. We'll focus on the basics first of school budgeting. We will share more information about BUSD's budget in particular. We will share our balancing target as well as how we're moving towards that target, answer some of your questions throughout, and then share with you next steps for BUSD budget and ways that you can stay engaged and informed. Now, before we go any further, I have to name and say that district and school budgeting is a rather complex process, and I want to be transparent that this session will not fully provide you a deep understanding of the intricacies of our district's budget, nor a deep understanding of school budgeting in general. However, our goal is to make sure that we all have some foundational information, and then again, make sure that you know where you can engage and involve yourself in budgeting conversations and decision-making in BUSD going forward. With that, we want to start by really grounding ourselves in some basic understanding of how school budgets are created and how they work. Next slide, please. So like the budgets that you likely do at home for your families or in your own business, our budgets are made up of revenues and expenditures. For us as a school district, the most viable and most important variable for our budgeting is our student enrollment. Our student enrollment drives both expenditures as well as revenues. It drives expenditures in a very obvious way, I believe. It informs how much staffing we need, what resources we need, et cetera. But it also drives revenues. Many of our funds are linked not just to student enrollment, but specifically student attendance. Many funds are dependent on the student enrollment and the demographics of those particular students who are enrolled in our system. And some funds are dependent on student performance and outcomes as well. And so again, a key variable for BUSD's budget is student enrollment, and us being able to have accurate projections for student enrollment, and then to sure up that enrollment once we know the true projections or the true enrollment and participation is really important for us in building our budget. Looking a little bit closer at our enrollment here in BUSD, we have about 9,077 students, and this slide shows you how those students break down in terms of demographics. Again, a significant amount of funding requires information and us knowing who our students are and how they fall in these demographic subgroups. Next slide. We also have funding that's dependent on our programmatic subgroups, including our students with IEPs, if our students are English learners, students who are experiencing housing insecurity, also known as McKinney-Vento students, as well as students in our foster youth programs and those receiving free and reduced lunch. Next slide. So again, student enrollment, and I should say student attendance, is a key factor in school budgets. Like your budgets, of course, we also have to understand our revenues. For school districts, there's three main sources for school funding. There's our state funding, our federal funding, and our local funding. If you look at the visual here on this slide, I hope you will be able to see that the majority of our funding comes from state. It's a little bit of a misnomer or misconception that the federal government provides the majority of funding. In fact, the truth is about 2% of Berkeley Unified's budget is federal funding. And in general, most districts across the country are only funded by 8 to 10% from the federal government. Again, for BUSD, our federal funding is about 2%, and our state funding makes up the majority at 53% for unrestricted and 19.6% for restricted. I also want to call out that a significant part of our budget is local funding. That is inclusive of parcel taxes as well as grants and other means locally that the school district receives money. But that still is a smaller fraction of the entire budget. I want to highlight BSEP here on the side because we want to appreciate you while we have you here, because BSEP does contribute a nice amount to BUSD's work and allows us to really move towards our mission and our 4 E's. Next slide. Again, as you think about school revenues, it is the funding sources, federal, state, and local, but there are also two main types of funding. We have unrestricted funds, and those are more discretionary, and we have a little bit more say of how we spend those funds and allocate those resources. And then we have restricted funds. Restricted funds, as the title implies, have restrictions on how we can use them. These funds are oftentimes called categorical funds, and they have very clear guidelines around who you can use the dollars for and how the dollars can be used. And oftentimes these restricted funds are sometimes coming with an expiration date. And so sometimes they're one time, we know we're going to have it for a year or 3 years, and then in other cases they are ongoing. Examples of these are on this slide here. Some of our Title I grants, our Learning Recovery Block grants, our Arts and Music Instructional Materials Block grant, which many of you have likely heard of. Next slide. A couple of key things to highlight about revenues for school districts is that, again, our revenues come primarily from the state. We get some from federal governments, but it's important to know that across school districts, or LEAs as we're called, the revenues are largely controlled by state and federal government. And so those local revenues and the things that we generate in partnership with you all and other community members and CBOs, et cetera, again, is a small part, but you can see here that the majority of the control is from the state and federal governments. I would also want to highlight that where our agency is really is in the expenditure side of our budgets, and we'll talk about that more momentarily. Next slide. I mentioned to you that school districts' revenues are made up of restricted dollars as well as unrestricted dollars. Those restricted dollars, again, are sometimes one time, we know when they're going to end, and then sometimes they're ongoing. In all cases, the restricted dollars have a very specific way that they have to be used and a very specific student group that they need to be able to target or serve. When we're doing school budgeting, a best practice is to use the restricted dollars first. In fact, when we're budgeting, we try to allocate budgets from our one-time restricted dollars first, and then our ongoing restricted dollars next, and then have a little bit more flexibility with those unrestricted dollars, again, where we have more discretion. Next slide. Another key difference between maybe your budget and my budget at home is that for school districts, we don't have the option to decide if we'll save, nor do we have the option really to decide how much we'll save, and that we are given some really clear guidelines around the fact that we have to save and we have to have what is called a reserve. I'm going to stop now and I'm going to introduce to you our Assistant Superintendent, Pauline Philansby, to share a little bit more about BUSD's reserve and the expectations that is given for how we keep and what we keep in our savings. Pauline?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Anika. So in terms of our reserves, we have what's called a state required reserve. And for our district, it's 3%. It's different for other districts, but in terms of our size and our revenue, our reserve is actually at 3%, and that's the state suggested, the state required reserve. There are also other reserves that can be set aside for emergencies, but for our district, our state required reserve is 3%.
Thank you, Pauline. Next slide. So now let's talk a little bit about expenditures for district and school budgets. Again, the previous slide had shared that most of the local agencies' budget control is on the expenditure side. Our board ultimately approves our budget for each year, and the board decides, with input, of course, from staff, how to spend the funds that we receive here in BUSD. Those funds can be used for organizational structure, employee compensation, instructional programs, support services, facilities, etc. On the visual in this slide, it shows you a little bit more of some examples of the programmatic decisions that boards make in terms of resource allocation, staffing decisions, and community services decisions. Examples for program decisions are the number of programs that we offer, the location of these programs, what curriculums do we buy, the range of programs that are offered to students and where they're offered. Staffing decisions include how we set up and organize our structures in terms of our administrative staff, what our class sizes are, staffing levels for pupil support positions, as well as staffing levels to support facilities and district operations. Community service, we think about the use of facility agreements, our recreational agreements, and before and after school supervision. All of these are the purview of the board, and as the superintendent, I create a budget package in collaboration with my team, as well as members of the community who are a part of the process we'll tell you about momentarily, to present a budget to our board that identifies and thinks about all of these things, waiting for ultimately their final approval, which typically takes place in the month of June. Next slide. Again, we are in charge of really deciding how to spend the dollars that we receive. Some of that spending or those expenditures are informed by state and federal law. Some are informed by our contractual agreements and partnerships with our labor partners. Some are informed by partnerships and agreements with grantors, for example. Next slide, please. But all of them should be informed and aligned to our district goals and priorities. This is why you will see that we have frequent conversations with our Board of Education around our LCAP. We have multiple conversations around our various plans, and we have been in conversation around the creation of our strategic plan that will bring all of those priorities, goals, and metrics together in one place. And so the alignment to these goals are central to us and our work. Is important to the Board of Education, and it's a part of all the budgeting conversations that we have. Another thing that's unique about BUSD's budget and all district budgets, likely not the same as yours, at least for sure not mine in terms of how I think about my budget, is that we actually have to budget and plan our budget over multiple years. We are required as a school district to have a budget every year that's submitted, where we are constantly in a cycle of figuring out and understanding our current budget, our current revenues, and the actual expenditures, and planning for future budget, future revenues, and future expenditures, while very much trying to figure out what those particular revenues will be, as again, that's not an area that we have the most discretion or input. I'm going to pause now and allow Pauline to share a little bit more with you about the multi-year projections, as well as at what points in time we get information about what our revenues might be and how that is changing quite regularly throughout the budgeting season. Pauline?
Okay. Thanks, Anika. The previous slide indicated that we're looking at 3 years at a time. And this budget cycle slide indicates that we have 1 foot in the current year while we're planning for the other year. So looking at this cycle for 25-26, we're actually past the March deadline. We're now in April. So we just submitted the second interim to the board for approval of the 24-25 year. At the same time, we were receiving information and compiling the 25-26 budget year. And we received in January, we received the governor's indication of how we should be constructing our budget based on his budget for the state. And then the next event that's going to happen is the governor's May revise that we're going to get towards the middle of May. And that's the last time we're going to get information for us to construct the 25-26 budget. I'll be explaining a little bit in more detail what do we actually get from the state and what assumptions we have to use in constructing this budget. Our final budget is presented to the board in June for their approval, but the state budget is approved after the district approves their budget in June, which means that we may need to do what's called a 45-day revise or revision to our 25-26 budget. But this is a complete process in terms of when we start the process for 25-26 and working on 24-25 budget while constructing the 25-26 budget. Next slide.
A couple of keynotes to take away as we close up this section and prepare to learn more about BUSD's budget is that our school district budgets are a year-round process. There is definitely something we call budgeting season, but really and truly there's not a budgeting season as we're always thinking about our budgets. Our budgets are, likely like yours, fluid documents, and we revise them on a regular basis as we get more information and as we know what our actual expenditures are. And our conditions are constantly changing as we are dependent on, again, federal and state government, mostly state, to give us information about the revenues that we'll be receiving. And that information does change as facts and realities at the state level change as well. We're going to now transition to, so that's the basics of school budgeting, kind of budgeting 101, if you will. And we're now going to transition to learn more about BUSD's actual budget. And for that, I'm going to pass it to Emily Mayer and Pauline Philansby to talk about BUSD's budget in specifics.
All right, so looking at our budget right here, what we're looking at, and this may look familiar to folks who came to our second interim budget presentation about a month ago. So this is what our current projections are for Berkeley Unified's revenue in what we call our combined general fund. And so our combined general fund, as Superintendent Ford Morthell had said, is combined of our state funding, our federal funding, and our local funding. And this combined general fund is looking at not only our unrestricted general fund, which is mostly our state local control funding, but it's also looking at our parcel taxes, including Measure H, BSEP, and BERA. And so you can see here the largest share of our revenue is the state local control funding. It makes up about 48% of our base, and then we also have an additional nearly 3% that's our supplemental funding. So for our students, based on our student need levels. We also have other sources of funding that's state level, like grants, particularly some of our block grants and our COVID-related funding sources. We have our parcel taxes, so we have Measure E, BERA, we have Measure E1, BSEP, and we have BB/H, which is our maintenance. And altogether, they make up nearly a third of our budget. And then we also have our local revenue. So these are local grants, these are PTA funds, these are sources that are raised locally outside of our parcel taxes. And then finally, as Superintendent Ford Morthell had said, only about 2% of this combined general fund revenue is from our federal funding sources. If we go to the next slide. So on our left, this is just a slightly different proportion view of tilted of what the revenue looks like in our combined general fund. And we look at all of these funding sources together, and that translates into how we build our budget across all of these different expenditure groups. And so the pie chart on the right is going to show how are we spending this budget, and each of these slices is going to have different pieces of federal, local, state funding. Biggest takeaway here, if we go to the next slide, is that just about 80% of this budget is actually people. if we look on our left here, we've got our certificated salaries, which is about 41% of our budget, our classified salaries, which is about 17% of our budget. And then we also have our employee benefits, and that green portion there is encompassing both our certificated salaries as well as our classified salaries. Each of those have benefits that are associated with it. And then we spend a much smaller portion on our services, on our contracts, on our books and supplies. And so really, when we're looking at what are we able to change about if that pie of revenue is shrinking, the areas that we have under our control are really restricted, and it can tend to affect people, unfortunately, quite a lot. And so if we look on the right here, this is looking at a pie chart of based on our spend on our salaries and our benefits across not actually just our combined general fund, but our district as a whole. Of this 80% of our budget that we're spending on pay for employees, about 12% of that is related to pay for administrators. So about 5% for classified administration, 7% for certificated administration. About 52% of our budget is spent on teachers, so their salary and benefit costs. And we also break into our classified and other types of certificated positions as well. And if we go to the next slide, we can actually look from a slightly different perspective. So this is looking at from individual people, how they make up the budget. So all of these people have salaries that form into that pie chart that we saw on the previous slide. This is looking at individuals. And so when we look at our certificated and our classified individuals and our employees who are based at sites and based at central office, we can see about 82% of our positions are site-based, and about 8% of our positions are administration. And half of those administration positions are central, and the other half would be at school sites. So principals, assistant principals, and leaders at those school sites. As you know, on March 5th, the board voted on layoff resolutions in closed and in open session, served them on March 15th. And so this affected employees in all of these groups. And I will turn it over to Pauline Follansbee to talk a little bit more about the process and how this, how we then go about turning where our budget's looking now into a budget for next year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. So on the next slide, we can review what happened in 24-25. This is a recap. So the year that we're currently in and that we're working on spending and working on our revenues, this budget year actually included $7.9 million in board-approved budget balancing solutions. These may have been reducing expenses or increasing revenue. But for us to have a balanced budget, we had to introduce $7.9 million in 24-25 for us to have a positive certification with the state. We started the 25-26 budget development process earlier than usual. We started in the fall, and we work with what is known as the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee, or SBAC, that we'll be hearing a little bit more about further in the presentation. So in our adopted budget, and as Anika mentioned, our budget and our assumptions, they're a moving document. So this demonstrates that in 24-25, when we looked at the adopted budget, because it contains a 3-year, multi-year projections, it gives us an opportunity to look at 25-26. And when we looked at 25-26 at the adopted budget, we determined that the target was about $8.5 million that we needed to balance the budget. That number has since been reduced to $7.6 million, and I'll be taking you through that in a little bit more detail further on. So we also do, we take to the board the adopted budget for the year, and then we also take a first interim and a second interim, and we get a chance to look at, well, what did we think we were going to do when we adopted the budget, and compare it to what we did at the first interim. And then at the second interim, we compare the first interim to the second interim. So the first interim is pretty early in the cycle. And by the second interim, which the cutoff is January, we have a little bit more time to look at how do we think we're going to actually, what are we going to actually spend and what are we actually going to receive? So for the 24-25 year. So one of the major things that we did between first interim and second interim, we had more information about the negotiated increases for some of our bargaining teams. So when you compare the two interims, you will see that salaries and benefits were a lot higher in the second interim than the first, and that was primarily due to negotiated increases. All of this information is included in our budget books and our budget submittals. That's on our website. And I encourage everyone to take a closer look at our budget and the changes that we have made as we actually go through the process in developing our budget. Next slide. This will look awfully familiar. We just talked about this. So again, we're just in April. We've done the second interim. We're waiting for the governor's May revise to inform 25-26, as well as the governor's final budget that may require us to make changes to our final budget and LCAP that we submit to the board in June for approval. Next slide. So this is an interesting slide, and we inherited it from our Alameda County Office of Education, who we work with closely in developing our budgets and in forecasting revenues and expenses. So Alameda County Office of Education works with several districts in Alameda. And overall, they're noticing that there's a declining enrollment for all the districts in California. In Alameda. Our enrollment is fairly steady. It has decreased when comparing it to pre-pandemic levels, but after the pandemic levels, our enrollment has been flat and actually increasing slightly. But all of us in Alameda are facing these challenges ahead. We're all facing stormy weather. There is the impact of us no longer having pandemic dollars or COVID dollars. That was a significant change for our budget. All of us are actually using our reserves. We talked about the reserves earlier, our 3% required reserves. Some of us are tapping into amounts that are in excess of the 3% reserves because, as I mentioned, we have to keep that level to be certified positive. We're also facing ongoing costs. We've had significant increases in salaries, and then we have to keep track with inflation. And of course, we're also expected to continue to meet the needs of all our students, as well as their academic, as well as their social emotional needs. And all of this takes a lot of funding. So our expenses are increasing while we're looking at challenging revenues, so hence the stormy weather ahead. Next slide. And just so you know, we're not alone. All the districts in Alameda County, and there are 18 districts, they're all tapping into their reserves. And then all of the districts are having to implement budget balancing solutions for 25, 26, 27. So we have company. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to do the work. We just know that we're not alone. A lot of other districts are in similar positions that we're in. Next slide. So now we're going to look at balancing our budget. So we can move on to the next slide. So when we're balancing our budget and when we're constructing our budget, we rely on assumptions from the state and from our budget partners, including an organization known as School Services. So this is getting really into the weeds, but we are all of us in financing for school services know about the dartboard. So when we talk about the dartboard, this is what we're talking about. Not only do we get planning factors for 24-25, but you can see they give us several out years as well. So this assists us when we're trying to develop projections for the out years. We rely on this information that we get from School Services, and that is based on their projections looking at state data. We also look at our retirement rates for CalSTRS and CalPERS. We get the projection for that. And we also get other projections for other revenues that we build into our budget, including California Lottery, unrestricted and restricted, and then also our mandate block grant and for the district. And of course, charter schools also get their assumptions as well. Next slide. So this brings us to our dartboard, if you will, not our dartboard, to our target or our multi-year projections. So we mentioned earlier that when we do a budget, we don't just look in the current year, we look at the current year and the subsequent 2 years. So this is the information in our multi-year projection that we shared with the board at second interim. So you can see we have a column for 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27. And as a reminder, we're currently building the budget for 25-26. So the first few rows, we're looking at assumptions, and these assumptions come from the dartboard. We also look at our ADA, or our average daily attendance, which is based on our enrollment. And Anika shared with you the importance that this particular data set, how it impacts our budget. So the assumptions are stated here. The unduplicated pupil count impacts our supplemental funding that Emily mentioned in her presentation, and that informs how much we get to spend on our specialized group or special set of students. So in this slide, again, this is just a refresher of what has been shared earlier. Remember, we look at revenues, we look at expenses, and that's what kind of informs the budget. So this slide is looking at the second interim revenues only, and this is only for the unrestricted general fund that we're focusing on here. So you can see that we're projecting 117 millions, and these are in millions, 119.9 in 25-26, and 123.7 in 26-27. And what is causing that increase is the COLA, or the cost of living adjustment, which you can see in the third row of this slide. Next slide. Then we also look at our expenses. And in our line items here, we're looking at our expenses, and we can see that it's 111 million, 114.3, and 116.8. But then we have that blue bar that's called the target. So that target is what we need to adjust the budget by, either reduce expenses or increase revenues. And you can see we refer to that as a target. So our target to balance the budget is $7.6 million ongoing, and an additional 0.2 in 26-27. So with us implementing these budget balancing solutions, our expenditures, we expect our expenditures to be 106.7 in 25-26 and 109 million. We also have another category that's called sources and uses, and the net of that is either going to be treated as revenue or as expenses. So that's listed in total because we have a lot of transfers between other funds and our funds, including BCEP's contribution to us comes in as a contribution, and then we contribute to other programs, including our special education. So what's important in this chart as well, in addition to the target, is a change in fund balance. That blue row indicates whether we're spending more than we're taking in, or if we're taking in more than we're spending, or if we're pretty much even. So in everybody's budget, including yours, you want to either spend more than you take in, or at least break even. You don't want to be dipping into savings because that's not sustainable. The first numbers in the blue section shows that a negative 1.7 million. That means that we're deficit spending, or spending more than we're bringing in by that 1.7 million. The other two numbers, we're at 0.1, that's reasonable, and 1.7, we have a surplus, or we're spending less than we're bringing in. However, that's after implementing the budget balancing solutions in our target. So with these budget balancing solutions, we're looking at an ending fund balance, which is the green row, of 2.2 million, 2.1 million, and 3.7 for the out years. However, we do need to set aside our responsibilities and things that we're responsible for paying for, including our share of the 3% reserve. So after we've done that, we go from 2 billion to 0.9 million in 24-25. We're looking at a $1.2 million. Wait, let me finish. Jill, back. $1.2 million in 25-26, and then we're looking at 3 million in the out years. So without these budget balancing solutions, you can see that we wouldn't even have a positive ending fund balance. So that's the main takeaway from this slide. Next slide. So this is an example of information that we receive from the governor's budget in January. The section below shows you what has changed since we got the information from the prior year about 25-26. So focusing on 25-26, you can see that we thought we were going to get a 2.93% COLA. And when the governor's budget came out, it was 2.43%. And that change is reducing our base revenue by about $500,000. Next slide. So the next thing we're going to look at is how we actually build the budget and how we balance the budget in BUSD. And I will turn it back over to Anikia Ford-Mortel, our superintendent.
Thank you, Pauline. So just a quick recap before going on to this next section. Again, want to appreciate the over 600 of you all who provided some feedback in the budget survey that we sent out last week, and specifically who had questions that you all wanted us to address and answer during this town hall. A quick recap is that the vast majority of you all felt that there was not enough information about the budgeting process in BUSD. And so we spent a little bit of time telling you about the budgeting process, but you also wanted to understand not just our district budget, but district budgets in general. So this last several slides have been about making sure you're clear on how district budgets are created, what our revenue looks like, what our expenditure looks like in general, the sources, the forms, and the types, but then specifically, what does BUSD's budget look like? And you've received that overview. Many folks asked for just a very simple budget overview, and so we know that there's others of you who would like more information and want to dig in deeper to many of these topics that we just covered, and I will be sharing with you how and where that can happen, but wanted to simplify and provide some responses to those inquiries in the first set of slides. Another question that was asked frequently from the survey was, how are the decisions made about the budget? And so that is what this next session will speak about. And we cannot speak about how budget decisions are made here in Berkeley Unified without introducing to you all the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee, or the SBAC. Next slide. And so the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee is a district-wide committee. It's an advisory committee that really advises me and my team as we are working to construct a budget to present to the board, a balanced budget to present to the board on our finances. The committee was actually established in 2008. I would love to take credit for this amazing team of folks who collaboratively bring different perspectives, ideas, and insights to make sure that we have not just a balanced budget, but a budget that is responsive to who we want to be as Berkeley, that is responsive to our values, and it really continues to advance us towards our mission for our over 9,000 students. So again, this committee was established in 2008, and it's comprised of about 17 voting members, with the idea that these folks are, again, giving me input, not just their own individual input, but they are going out into the community and the respective groups they represent and getting ideas and bringing those ideas to the table and to the discussions for SBAC. And they're also getting information from SBAC and taking it back into their respective communities or advisory groups. Members who are on the SBAC are very diverse. We have representatives from our BUSD staff. We also have representatives from our 4 bargaining units, and we have a number of community members who are representing different advisory committees in our districts, as well as site committees in our districts. We also have a student representative, and we have not yet been able to have a consistent student rep, but we're looking forward as there's been a number of students who have expressed interest in participating in SBAC as voting members. The Assistant Sup of Business Services, who you've just heard from, is the chair of those meetings in partnership with me. And we have two school board meetings members, who are the liaisons to that meeting. Next slide, please. The functions of the SBAC really is to review our current budget as well as to review the budgets to come, with the main focus of helping us understand our budget, understand what's happening in terms of expenditures, as well as our revenues, to make some decisions about the budget in the year to come. And so they review the budget, procedures, or any specific items that I might ask them to do, but actually they do a lot more of asking of me and my team to bring back information and data to help them make informed recommendations. If appropriate, they provide written recommendations to me. But again, this committee was established in 2008. We're in 2025, and we are much more advanced technologically. And so oftentimes those recommendations are made in real time, though various advisory committees do sometimes submit recommendations to me through this particular committee. Ultimately, the committee makes recommendations and engages us in discussion. We hear from the members of the public, as this is a public meeting and we do have public comments, to ultimately help and support me in the challenging and critical job of creating a balanced budget, again, that is really much aligned to who we want to be in Berkeley Unified and what we want to make sure is real and true for our students. Next slide, please. And so a couple of you had questions about not just who makes the decisions or who makes the recommendations, but how are these decisions made? And so I want to share with you a couple guiding documents that we use as we create and build our budget, not just this year in a time of budget balancing and reductions, but every year here in BUSD. These core values of resource allocation that you see on the screen were created about a year ago in partnership with members, again, of the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee. And it really was a way for us to ground ourselves in some principles, if you will, as we engage in some really rigorous conversations around budget and resource allocation. I want to name and point out that our very first value is equity. Some of you all have asked questions about some of our focal populations, our English learners, our students experiencing homelessness, and just some students who just need more support and resource. And so we ground ourselves first as an SBAC in equity, allocating resources to create conditions to realize our mission while addressing inequities and removing barriers that hinder that mission from being realized for all of our diverse student body. Another value is transparency. We really believe it is essential that the community understands the criteria and conditions that inform the allocation of resources. This webinar is a reflection of that. We have a number of other ways that we try to share information and make sure that you all understand not just what's going on, but how decisions are made. And given some feedback from you all, we decided to have this webinar to increase the transparency around this process and the budget in general in Berkeley. We believe in excellence, and that is that we engage in continuous improvement, reflecting on resource allocation decisions, progress monitoring, and using data to inform and evaluate implementation and impact. Some of you all in the survey made comments like, the way that we should decide what we need to reduce or change should be informed by data, and should be looking at, are we getting the outcomes or the return on the investments that we expect, and how is it impacting our students? And so I want to let you all know that this continuous improvement that we engage in, not just in SBAC, but as a way of being here at the district and in our district across our staff members, is a critical way that we're able to then make sure that our information is actually good information to help us make more informed decisions. Engagement, we believe that context matters, and that those closest to the work with the deepest understanding must have input in the decisions to leverage resources and meet student needs. And that is why this particular committee is rather diverse. Again, we have parents and caregivers. We have student who is a student rep, but we have students who come and speak and share. We also have members, again, of our labor unions, as well as staff members on this committee. And so we have a number of different ideas and perspectives from folks who are actually doing the work, as well as those who are impacted by the work. We also have ways outside of SBAC to engage, and that survey was a sample, but throughout BUSD, we have a number of advisory committees, groups, and feedback forums where folks, again, get to weigh in about budget specifically, but in general about their experiences, what they want for their students, and how things are going. And then these last two are really important, and they are two words or two values that have kind of one definition, and those are sustainability and stability. We really want to make sure we allocate resources responsibly, planning not just on how to start programming, but also considering the staff, time, and resources required to sustain those initiatives. It is really important that we not just think about this year or this group of students, but that we make decisions for the students to come, and that we do things that we're going to keep some level of stability in our district, and that things that we actually can sustain over multiple years to the benefit of more students. Another key document and resource that SBAC uses is our strategies for budget balancing. Can you click, please? Thank you. Our strategies for budget balancing. And so, again, those were our core values of resource allocation. These are our budget balancing strategies. And I apologize for the typo. It should say budget balancing. What you see here across these 7 strategies are the practices and the things that we do as we move towards balancing our budget. They are not necessarily in a specific order, but I do want to point your attention to the very first strategy, which is evaluate and remove vacant positions. This is the first step that we take every single year in Berkeley as we're thinking about our budget. And quite honestly, it's a common step that is taken across multiple districts. I also want to draw your attention to the very last strategy, which is consolidate and reduce positions and programming. That is the very last thing that we want to do, and very much consistent with the feedback we've heard from you. We try our best to make sure that those who are closest to the work, those who are closest to our students more specifically, are not impacted by these budget reductions and this budget balancing unless they actually ultimately have to be. And so again, though, remembering what Emily said, that our budget is about 80% staff, it is challenging to do so, particularly after we've just made $7.8 million of reductions in the year prior. If you notice, there are 5 strategies in between vacant positions and positions in programming. And those are really important because those are where the meat, if you will, of our budget conversations happen in SBAC. We're looking for opportunities to true up costs, evaluating program costs, and making sure the allocation actually matches what is happening and the students being served and the actual costs of that particular program. We're looking for ways that we can eliminate expenses that are covered in other funding sources or find other funding sources for expenses that we currently have. We want to evaluate annual unexpended funds. You know, it may not be common in your particular budget, but in our budget, there are cases that we realize that we've left money on the table. And so we want to make sure that we're seeing where those patterns are and making sure that we're using our dollars for our students. And again, being really responsible stewards of our funds. We also look for inefficiencies. We identify programs or even positions sometimes where there might be a duplication of effort, or where are we, again, not getting as much traction in the direction that we want to. And then we find ways to transfer expenses to other funding sources. And so this slide is important for us as members of SBAC, and definitely important to myself and staff, because we really want to make it clear that the very last thing that we ever want to do is consolidate and reduce positions in programming, despite the fact that we know that 80% of our budget, about 80%, goes to people and positions. Next slide, please. Both of these things together are things that you will see and hear in every single SBAC conversation, as well as in all of our presentations to our Board of Education. And so we do hope that they allow you to have some level of insight as to what's guiding our conversations, the things that we value, as well as what are our steps, if you will, as we move to balancing our budget. Next slide, please. You heard me say earlier that we have the most kind of purview, if you will, and agency around our expenses, and that regardless of what is asked of us, our main priority needs to be that our expenses, our resource allocation is aligned to our goals and to our priorities in the district. And so this slide is not at every SBAC meeting, but want to assure you that staff and our board are always thinking about what are our priorities, what are the things that we said we're going to do, and what are our metrics as we think about and engage in conversations about resource allocation. There were a couple of comments that said, oh, the LCAP should drive where we make reductions, or the developing strategic plan should drive the budget decision. And I want to let you all know that those things are definitely foundational as we think about what we're going to start doing, what we're going to stop doing, and what we might have to do differently. Next slide, please. The other thing that's really important about the conversations that happened in SBAC, but also the conversations that are just necessary for any district budgeting conversation, is to think about the nuances of the services that we provide, still all working in service of our students and all working in service of making sure that mission is real and true for every student. And so what we have in a school district are layers of service, and every layer is critical. We have direct service. Examples of direct service can include classroom teachers. These are people who directly work with students on a regular basis. Our wellness staff, our interventionists, and our bus drivers are examples of direct service providers or direct service. Direct service is critical, and research says it is critical. But what we also know is that we need supports and scaffolds and structures to support those who are providing the service to students. And we also just need a whole ecosystem of services and support to make sure that our students get what they need and thrive. And so direct service on its own is not enough. We also have to think about indirect service. Examples of indirect service include professional development, some of our content coaches who support our teachers to be able to do the work that they're doing directly with our students, for example. Operations is another essential piece of a school budget, and without operations, we would not be able to provide services to our students. Operations include technology, student transportation and nutrition services, our facilities, legal mandates, and all those things that keep the lights on. The things that we don't always want to think about, but a dark classroom is not a classroom that's going to be engaging and facilitate learning. Finally, there's administration. And a lot of feedback was, get rid of or reduce administration. And for sure, when we talk about folks who have been noticed, we will share with you how administration has been impacted by that. Examples of administration are site principals and vice principals, our human resources department that does our hiring and our recruitment, our legal services department, and of course, our curriculum and instruction department, which is responsible for making sure that there's consistent, rigorous, engaging curriculum and instruction happening across all of our grade levels. Next slide, please. And then finally, I wanted to just overview for you the phases of budget development as we engage SBAC and other stakeholder groups to ultimately end up with a balanced budget package for the 25-26 school year. And so again, thinking about our mission statement, which we start every meeting with, our 4 E's, we want to establish a common vision and goals for a balanced budget. We want to confirm our priorities for our district's work and mission, which again can be found in those LCAP plans, as well as the various plans, our ASF framework, our multilingual learner plan, that will ultimately all be housed in our strategic plan. We want to, after we ground ourselves, make sure we're on the same page and want the same thing for our students. We spend a lot of time in SBAC and actually outside of SBAC as a staff, really in the analysis phase, compiling and evaluating costs, looking for evidence of effectiveness and ineffectiveness, doing comparative analysis for our programs, for our services, and for our activities. That's that continuous improvement part that I talked about earlier. All of that in service of creating a balanced budget, all of that based on not just our current budget and current reality, but also doing some historical data as well to look and see how those activities or those costs actually, panned out in previous years. Then we move to proposing options. We identify opportunities for cost savings and revenue generators. Oftentimes when folks think about budget balancing, they go straight to cuts or straight to reductions. That is not where our SBAC team is going, and that's not where we're staying. In fact, we spend a lot of time thinking about cost savings and ways to reduce expenses, but we also spend a significant amount of time, particularly this year, thinking about ways to generate revenue for our district. In our survey that we sent out to you all last week, we actually share with you some of the ideas, they're just ideas at this point, that have come up and asked you to weigh in on what you think. We also asked you for some ideas that you might have as how we can generate revenue for our district to, again, make sure we're able to move towards our target, but still provide the programs, the services, and move towards our mission the way that we all would like to. And so the analysis and the proposal of options phase is the phase that SBAC is in currently and has been for the last several weeks. I'm going to pause because I saw a hand of one of my facilitators. Jessica, did you need something?
No, that was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. Thank you. So that analysis and proposal options is where we spend a lot of time looking at programs, looking at data, asking questions, and then thinking about how that information informs proposals. And so what we do is we bring proposals as a staff to SBAC, and we allow them to weigh in on those proposals. And conversely, SBAC brings proposals to us, and again, we engage in conversations to figure out which proposal we'd like to advance to ultimately inform the budget that I present to the board later in May. That's the next section that you see here. The SBAC makes recommendations towards a package of strategies to ensure a balanced budget for the 25-26 school year in this case. And then ultimately, I create a budget that I present to the board around May, and the board has the final approval of our budget, which typically happens in June. So again, those are the phases of development for our budget. Next slide, please. I've said a lot about SBAC, and many of you have probably heard a lot about SBAC. There is a page on our website that has information about all of our SBAC meetings, including agendas, artifacts, as well as the presentation decks, including recordings of those meetings. And so if you just really are curious, you could actually watch the meeting in its entirety. I want to invite you all to our next SBAC meeting, which is April 23rd at 4 p.m. These are virtual meetings, and the one after that is on May 13th. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the work that SBAC has been doing to move us closer to that target that Pauline mentioned to you earlier. Pauline?
Thank you, Nikia. Next slide, please. So this is our roadmap, and it is a roadmap. We have a debate about that, but anyway, so this shows you what our target is for 25-26, and you notice we have two columns, ongoing and one time. We would like all our solutions to be ongoing, but to the extent that they're one time, they're scored accordingly. So our target at the second interim is $7.6 million. We presented several options or several solutions to SBAC. We did phase 1 on February 26th, and we thought at that point we had $1.3 million in budget balancing solutions. However, you can see at the March 26th meeting, we amended that amount by $211,000 because new information came to light, and we had to revise that number down to $1.1 million. So phase 1, we got $1.1 million. Phase 2, we presented at February 26th meeting, we got $2.7 million. So of the $7.6 million target, we had a balance of $3.8 million after presenting phases 1 and 2. Next slide. And how did we actually, what procedures and what steps did we take to actually generate some of these budget balancing solutions? As Anika shared with you, we have various strategies that we use. And for us to do the $1.1 million, we used about $500,000. We evaluated and removed vacant positions. We also eliminated expenses covered in other funding sources of about $110,000. Then we transferred $70,000 of expenses to other funding sources, and we consolidated and removed positions and programming of about $399,000, almost $400,000. Next slide. And then in phase 2, that's a $2.7 million I mentioned earlier, we trued up program costs into the tune of $1.1 million. And then we had a new category, revenue. We had new revenue being generated into the tune of $1.6 million. So this is a lot of information, the detail of which can be found on the SBAC website. If you go to each meeting, you will have a detail of everything that comprise these various phases. Next slide. So we also introduced phase 3 at our last meeting. And as you can see, phase 3 was $1.3 million in ongoing expenses. And for the first time, we introduced about $500,000 in one-time proposals. So again, starting with the 7.6 million, reducing it by the 1.1 in phase 1, reducing it by the 2.7 in phase 2, and now reducing it by phase 3, or the balance that we need, the total balance solutions needed 2.6 million ongoing, but of course we have this 500,000 one time. So we're netting the two with the understanding that yes, we have more work to do for the one times in the upcoming year, but our target after phase 3, we're looking at $2.1 million needed in budget balancing solutions. So staff will be working to bring back solutions to SBAC at the next meeting on the 23rd. And it's challenging, but it's an effort that lots of us participate in. So next slide. So at this point, I will turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Samantha Tobias Espinoza for us to talk about personnel and programs and the March 15th letters.
Pauline, is gonna be me again.
Oh, it's you. I thought it was
Apologies
Sam. Sorry.
No worries. Sam will be here to support me, but apologies to anyone who was looking to hear some different voice. It's me again.
Sorry.
And we are moving into the implications of budget balancing on personnel and programs. Again, next slide, please. We were reminding ourselves, and we know that about 80% of our budget is people, staffing, and personnel. And so it is very challenging, if not impossible, to have conversations about budget balancing and budget reduction without talking about the ways it impacts our staff and our personnel at all levels across the org. It's particularly challenging to do so, again, after making significant reductions to our budget just last year, really doing a pretty good job in partnership with the thought partnership of our SBAC and other folks who weighed in and gave us ideas of making significant cuts without significantly impacting personnel and programs this year. Next slide, please. And so Pauline showed you the visual and told you a little bit about a story about how and when we learn about our budget as school districts. She talks about the January 10th governor's budget, when we find out what the governor is thinking and how they are planning on allocating resources. There's the May revise, as well as the state budget, which comes later in July, again, after our board has already approved our budget. What those timelines did not show is what this particular visual is showing, is that there are a number of decisions being made, but made rather late. For many of you all who work in different sectors, you know that for a lot of jobs and positions, you might get 2 weeks notice or 30 days notice, or some folks get some same day notice. Because we recognize, or because the state recognizes that our district budgeting timelines do not allow enough time for employees to get notice and to know what they're going to do if they're going to be reduced or if their assignment is going to be changed. There are some provisions that are put in place by law to make sure that we notify employees. We do not want to wait until June when our budget is approved, and much less we don't want to wait until July when we're waiting for the governor to tell us the final budget if there's any changes, to let folks know if and how they've been impacted by the budget decisions. And so again, law has some ways of protecting the employees, if you will, by requiring us to notify them before May 15th, but first giving a notification of a possibility of changes to their employment FTE and status no later than March 15th. Next slide, please. And so we know that this is a question that's been asked a lot. And so what we've done is we've pulled some slides from the board presentation on this very topic that we did at the last board meeting. At the end of this webinar, I will share with you how you can access not just this video, but also the videos on our other board meetings. But this one was really one of interest for sure. So we thought it was worth it to bring some of those slides over. And so the decision and the requirement to notice employees of potential layoff or change in assignment is actually rooted in Ed Code, and it's Ed Code EDC 44949 that says no later than March 15th and before an employee is given notice by the governing board that his or her service will not be required for the next school year, the governing board should give that employee written notice about the possibility. March 15th notices are also rooted in our contractual agreements with some of our labor partners. You'll see here an excerpt from our agreement with BFT, Berkeley Federation of Teachers, that says that teacher on special assignments, we also call them TSAs, must be notified in advance because they have a right to return to the classroom. And so we want to make sure they know in advance if they will be returning to the classroom that following year. And so that particular contractual agreement does not call out March 15th, but consistent with other notification timelines, we do notice our TSAs or teachers on special assignment if they might be reassigned for the following year by March 15th. As we think about our administrators, we know that they are also required by law to be notified. Ed Code 44951 says, unless a certificated employee is holding a position requiring an administrative or supervisory credential, they shall be sent written notice again of March 15th. And then also California Ed Code EDC 45117 requires that we provide the same notification for classified employees to be noticed by March 15th if they are going to possibly be laid off due to lack of work or lack of funds. I do want to note that this law to protect our classified employees is a rather new law, and so we're now happy that those folks have similar protections as our certificated positions as well. Next slide, please. And so a couple of things we want to just clarify. March 15th notices are an attempt to protect employees in education by providing advance notice of the possibility, and that's a key word, we should have put it in bold, underlined it twice, of the possibility of layoff or change in workforce. Again, our budgets are not finalized until June. We cannot wait. It would be irresponsible to wait until June to let our educators and our staff know if there's any changes to their position. It is a practice that's also not unique to Berkeley Unified. It's a practice, again, governed by law that is used across all school districts. What March 15th notices are not, they are not related to job performance, except for there's a small group of employees, like with any other employment agency or any other organization, where if there are some concerns about performance, there might be a non-reelection. And so in this case, there are some employees who may receive a non-reelection notice around March 15th, but in general, March 15th notices are not related to job performance, nor are they a notification of final layoff or reassignment. They are, again, a notification of the possibility as we figure out our budget, given all the factors that we've just explained to you in the previous slide. The final notification will be given and has to be given by May 15th. Another opportunity to provide some information and clarification. Again, it's a much more detailed explanation in our March 15th update to the board that happened at the last board meeting, is that for our classified staff, who, again, this is a rather new law that we have to make sure they know by March 15th, and we're happy to give them advance notice. But for our classified staff in particular, these notices of potential layoffs are specifically about layoffs. They, again, have to notify our classified staff of the potential of layoff due to lack of funds or lack of work. That is the only type of March 15th notice that exists for our classified staff. On the contrary, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, for our certificated staff, these March 15th notices can mean a number of things. They can signify reassignment. I mentioned to you our teachers on special assignments, which we have many in our district. Those notices let them know that they might be reassigned to another school or another work location. The vast majority of notices that were sent to our certificated educators have been reassignment notices, not layoff notices. The March 15th notice can also be for certificated staff, notice of temporary release. We have some employees, certificated employees, who are on contract. When they start and when they are hired, they are clear that their contract has an end date. They still get a notice, though, to remind them that they are likely not or may not have a position in the upcoming year. And so temporary releases are another form of March 15th notices that were given out and are given out in BUSD and across districts. There's also non-reelection for probationary staff, as well as layoffs. If you notice on this slide, only about 22 of the March 15th notices given to our certificated staff were specifically about layoffs. Again, the majority were reassignments. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes, again, on March 5th, our board had to approve the lists and the positions of our members of our BUSD family who would be receiving these notices. And so those were done in the form of resolutions in open session, Resolution 25026 for our classified eliminations and reductions, Resolution 25025 for our particular kinds of service or PKS reductions. And we also had in closed session some resolutions to consider reducing or reassigning some of our unrepresented or administrative staff. Anyone who was related to personnel matters were also taken care of in closed session. In total, we sent March 15th notices to 182 classified staff members and 191 certificated staff members. Again, not to say they're getting laid off, but to let them know that we are in the middle of a really intense and rigorous budget situation and budget conversations. And we wanted to give them the notice per law that there's a possibility of reassignment, change in assignment, or reduction in their FTE, or yes, a layoff in some cases. These notices and the numbers that you see on the screen represent employees across all bargaining units. So that's BFT, BCCE, UBA, and Local 21, as well as staff employees who are unrepresented, folks like our district office staff, our cabinet members. Next slide. This slide also just gives you a little bit more of a drill down of who received notices and what types of notices were sent out. I do want to clarify on this slide that we give notices to people. However, what we're really looking at is the FTE or full-time equivalent of those positions. What I mean by that is that it can be one FTE, one full-time equivalent that is giving out to 5 people. And that is why there are cases where the number of people who were noticed is a large number, but the number of FTE that we're really thinking about making changes to is a smaller number. Next slide. Go ahead and click. As I shared with my board at the last board meeting when we made this presentation, we love our people. We know that the people and the programs in BUSD programs need people to run are incredibly essential to us realizing our mission and really do make our 4 E's real and true. And so we are working hard to rescind as many notices as we can in real time. So as we get more information and more clarity about our budget, we rescind notices again in real time. As of yesterday, we've rescinded about 62 notices, and you will see some of those positions here on this screen. We still have more rescissions to do, and again, we do them as we get more information. Next slide, please. I wanted to, again, just draw your attention to the fact that we do have a video of that presentation to the board that you can access on our website. That meeting was on April 8th, and we also have a March 15th notices FAQ that is exclusive to our staff, but we know we have some staff members on this call as well. And so we've created that FAQ earlier this year in February, and want to make sure that, again, folks know that that information is available to you as well. Next slide. It is 5:13 and we have shared a mouthful. We've tried our best to respond to many of the questions, most of the questions actually, that were in the survey. And one of those questions was, how do I stay informed and engaged in the BUSD budgeting process? And where and how can I learn more about the budget in general? And so these last couple slides are an attempt to answer those particular questions. Next slide, please. Stay informed and engaged. So this is Pauline's face. She looks the same. We have actually a web page on our BUSD website that is called the Business Services webpage. You can access this particular webpage by going to our main homepage. And at the top part of the screen, you'll see where it says Offices, and you can click on Business Services and you'll be taken to this page. What I want to highlight about this page, besides Pauline's beautiful picture, is that this page actually has a lot of historic information about BUSD's budget. Some of you all asked, we want to see line by line. We want to see what the expenditures are and what the revenues were in any given year. And that information is and has been available on our website for quite some time. You'll see here from this screenshot that not only do we have the 24-25 second interim report, adopted budget for the 24-25 and the first interim, but we have budgets going as far back as 2019, 2020, 2018, and 2019. And this is only what I was able to capture in the screenshot to fit on this slide. So if you are the person who is interested in all those reports, who is interested in the fine details, line by line, of how our money is spent and what our budget looks like, I encourage you to go to the Business Services webpage, pick a year, pick what you want to see, and click, and that information is available to you. Next slide, please. We also heard you loud and clear. Some of you all didn't know about the business webpage, but even those of you all who did know about that webpage, you continue to say, we want something simpler. There's some who want to get all into the weeds, and there's others who want just a quick glance and snapshot and updates. And so we have since created a new webpage called BUSD Budget Business webpage. And on that webpage, it has a host of information. It has some key terms, it has dates, and it has other quick and easily accessible information about our budget and where we are in the budgeting process. So thank you for that feedback and for that ask. Again, we believe that transparency should be and is one of our core values. And so in response to your request, we've created that new webpage. But please do not let Pauline's Business Services webpage lie dormant. Put her to work. She's put a lot of effort, her and her team, to put some really detailed information there. So I want you to know about both of those resources. We also have an SBAC webpage, the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee. Again, we meet regularly, and if you go to our website and you put in SBAC in the search menu, you will be taken to this particular webpage that not only tells you more about the SBAC committee, what it is, what it's for, what they do, but probably more importantly for you, it gives you access to the recordings of those videos and all the artifacts from those meetings, and also tells you when the next meeting is and how you can participate. Again, those are open to the public, and we do have a section of the meeting for public comments every time we meet. I've also created a budget video series primarily for staff. We release it to staff first, and then we release it and share it on our budget business webpage. But those updates provide just general information about where we are in the process of our budget. And we hope that those have been and will continue to be helpful and informative to our staff members as they engage with us in this process, but also as they are impacted by the implications of any decisions that are made. And finally, we invite you all to the Board of Education meetings. Those are also accessible on our webpage. Our next Board of Education meeting is on Wednesday, April 30th. I think what's important for me as we share this slide again is to echo our core value around transparency, and also to name and respond to a lot of the survey feedback that we need to know more about the budget. We don't have information, it's not clear. This slide is trying to show you a number of ways through different modalities that you can learn more about the budget. Some are more interactive than others, but please know that it's here. And again, this webinar is another way for us to continue to be responsive and transparent. There's only 37 of you on this call, which is interesting because we had 600 respond to the survey, and way more than 37 said we want information. Where can we get information? So this particular webinar will also be recorded and posted on our website for those who are not able to be here this evening for the presentation live. Next slide, please. Finally, as you all know, we sent out a survey just to ask you what you feel and what you think about budget. We did receive some feedback. Well, we don't know enough to fill it out, and our intent was not for you, again, to be experts in our budget or budgeting in general, but just to honor your experiences and your ideas as folks who are either caregivers and families or students or staff about what you think we should be thinking of as we do this work. And so I want to appreciate that we have already received over 600 responses. As you can see, we got a lot of responses from Berkeley High School. We opened up the survey not just to our staff and to you, our family and community members, but also to our high school students. We want to hear what they have to say. We are thinking about ways in the years to come to get some input from our middle schoolers and other students as well with regard to our budget priorities, if you will, and how we're doing with the ways that we're allocating our resources. I also want to note that we've had a pretty huge response from our parents and caregivers, and we anticipate getting more response from our staff in the days to come. But please, please, please fill out the survey, give us some ideas. There was a lot that you said in there that we were like, yes, we're on the right track. These are things that SBAC has been bringing up and thinking of. And then there were some other things like, wow, we didn't think about that. So thank you again for your thoughtful participation in that survey. It is going to be open until this coming Monday, April 21st at 5 p.m. Next slide, please. So this is a quote that we share in our SBAC. It's really our challenge, our responsibility to spend today's dollars on today's children, but not at the expense of tomorrow's children. And so we're thinking about how do we engage in multi-year budgeting with so much uncertainty, and even not just uncertainty because of this year and this climate, but as Pauline explained, we're waiting. There's a lot of waiting to understand what our revenues truly will be. We don't know that into July after the budget has been approved. And then we have to wait for data around what our expenditures are based on enrollment, attendance. So there's lots of moving factors and lots of variables. However, I again applaud not just the SBAC, but all of you who work with us, who come to board meetings and make public comments, who reach out to me personally, our various affinity groups and advisory groups, and just the different ways that folks give input and share ideas and really ask some really rigorous and tough questions, because I do believe that we can together definitely balance budgets, of course, but more importantly, balance a budget that's in service of what we want to make real and true for our students. And that's to make sure that they are enabled and inspired to achieve academic excellence and make positive contributions to the world. And so with that, we say thank you. On our next slide, we actually say it. The next slide says it. Watch, there it is. We say thank you. We thank you for the idea of this webinar. We thank you for your questions that informed the agenda, excuse me, and topics covered in this webinar. And we thank you and look forward to your continued engagement and partnership in the various ways as we move through the budget process for the 24-25 school year, preparing us for 25-26. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.